We hear a lot about the affordable housing crunch in Ontario's capital city, but of course this problem goes well beyond Toronto. Hamilton, Barrie, London, and the list goes on of cities in Ontario dealing with this issue. Here to give us a sense of what that looks like on the ground and how it's factoring into the municipal elections, Jim Dunn, professor and urban geographer at Hamilton's McMaster University, and Brian Doucette, Canada Research Chair in Cities at the University of Waterloo's School of Planning. Gentlemen, good to have you on TVO tonight.
Thank you. Thanks.
Let us just, in broad terms, Jim, you first. What spillover effect has the housing affordability, I mean, it's almost a crisis, in Toronto had on the Greater Golden Horseshoe?
Well, we're seeing it very acutely in Hamilton, where lots of people are making trade-offs about where they live and how they're going to get to work. So, for instance, the housing crisis in Toronto, things are so expensive that couples, for instance, who have two incomes going can say, oh, well, you know, we're beating our brains out to afford this incredible house in Toronto. Why don't we actually move down the QEW? We can have one person make a long commute, and the other can stay home, and we can actually have more disposable income and still have every bit as nice a lifestyle and as nice a house. And that's having a big impact on the market in ways that are quite disturbing too. You
can actually get twice the house for half the money.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you're saying a profound effect on the market in as much as?
Without question, it's having an impact on driving up prices, on purchase prices, as well as squeezing the rental market in important ways. So we're seeing a lot of things happening where people are being displaced as a result of just the overall pressures on the market. It includes some of the squeeze from Toronto.
Brian, what are you seeing?
We don't see it as much in the same way in Hamilton, in Waterloo region. Where we see it really being quite acute is at the lower end of the housing market. So in sheltered accommodation, in affordable housing, in moving from affordable or from sheltered accommodation to rental markets. Our rental markets are very tight at the moment. So that's really in Waterloo region in particular where the affordability crisis is at the moment.
When you refer to, I've seen you say the region is undergoing a change of character. Mm-hmm. Just amplify on that a bit. What do you mean?
So Waterloo region in particular is sort of shifting from a smaller city or a town kind of idea. And if you compare with other places across Ontario, where the more money you had, the further out from the city centre, from the downtown you'd live. And we're starting to see, with a growing tech industry in downtown Kitchener and with our new light rail line, a reordering of that geography. So now we're getting people with more money coming in to the core urban areas, and that's having pressure on affordable housing, because some of those affordable housing rental units in particular are being gentrified.
Let me follow up on the transit angle. There's light rail transit going in all over the place, some in Waterloo region, there's a line coming in Hamilton, there's stuff all over the city of Toronto. What's that doing? What's the impact of all of that on housing affordability?
I mean, I think that has a positive impact in a lot of ways, or prospects anyways, for a positive impact, because it's going to create a lot of density along those lines, which is really important. So we can build more units in less space, and then the municipalities can afford to service that at a much lower cost than they can in a kind of sprawling housing arrangement. And I think the other thing too is it will provide access for a lot of people. So a rapid transit line like that actually allows people to get to jobs and to other kinds of opportunities in ways that they can't if they're living in a housing that they require a car for, or have to take several buses and that sort of thing. So that's, I think, a really big development. The other thing that's going to happen in Hamilton is that to build the LRT, Metrolinx is having to acquire a bunch of property. And so that property, some of it will be, they'll take a slice of 3 meters off the front, and then there'll be, at some point, it'll go back into the market. And if that can be moved in a way that actually promotes affordable housing and is directed towards affordable housing, which makes sense that a public institution like Metrolinx and the city of Hamilton would do. Mm-hmm. If we could direct that kind of land towards primarily affordable housing, then it could have a big impact on affordable housing in the city.
We had the mayoral candidates for Cambridge here the other night, and I think it emerged during the course of that discussion that Kitchener-Waterloo, because of the LRT, has $1 billion in development permits that have been realized over the last number of years.
Yeah.
I mean, as commute times get shorter because public transit improves, presumably that's going to have an impact on this as well, is it not?
Yeah, I think having transit investment is great, but I think it also has to be seen within a wider picture. So transit investment without a housing policy to mitigate some of those effects that Jim is talking about in terms of more density, but also higher prices, leads to a situation where we get this great transit access, this great transit line, but you need quite a lot of money to be able to afford to live along that line, as we see in Toronto. So the danger is that without any sort of regulation about provisions for affordable housing, you'll get very expensive single-family homes or fairly expensive smaller condos, and that doesn't serve the entire market of people who would need to live along that line.
Brian, let me follow up with this, because I know many people are sensitive to the notion that they are somehow seen as bedroom communities to Toronto. You know, everybody wants to be thought of as an independent, you know, standing up for oneself community or city. But okay, let's deal with the empirical provable evidence here. Is that in fact the case, that Toronto is by virtue of its growth, is making Hamilton, Burlington, Oakville, Kitchener, Waterloo, bedroom communities to the 416?
I mean, I've had this discussion with people in the region. Like, if Toronto was 1,000 kilometers away, would there still be the same housing challenges? And it's a bit of a, you know, philosophical question. But the conclusion was that these make some of the housing challenges more extreme because we are getting those spillover effects. At the same time, we have in Waterloo region a very dynamic, growing economy that's very diversified and has been for many decades. So it's not just like a community where people sleep and then get on the 401 and drive into the Toronto area. You're seeing, I think, and we don't have a whole lot of empirical evidence, but speaking to people on the ground, seeing more people moving out of the GTA who are choosing for cheaper housing in regions like ours or in Hamilton. But that doesn't mean that these regions all of a sudden become purely bedroom communities for Toronto.
They're not just commuter cities.
No, absolutely.
They're not, but there's a lot of angst in Hamilton about that.
Okay, go ahead.
So it's very common for people to say, we don't want to become a bedroom community of Toronto. And the fact is, I don't think there's any choice, right? People are going to make decisions about where to live. The transportation connections are only going to get better. So as the big move proceeds, right, the Metrolinx policy, they're anticipating at some point, I don't know what the time frame now is, but by, you know, probably within 10 years, all-day GO service from downtown Hamilton to downtown Toronto, and electrification of the line, which will reduce the travel time immensely. Things are all over then, right? Things are going to change immensely at that point because people will be willing to make that commute more and more. And the thing is that, yes, people are going to make those choices, and yes, to some extent, we might become a bedroom community, but how can we leverage that to our advantage, right? So how can we actually take those, you know, that additional influx, you know, of people who are going to start businesses, who are going to, you know, consume services that can be provided by local businesses and so forth, and actually direct that in ways that are to the greater good, then that's a good thing to do.
Go ahead.
It also works the other way. If places like Kitchener are more accessible to Toronto, not only does it operate as a sort of safety valve or pressure valve for housing in Toronto, but also gives employers more options in where they want to locate. If you can hop on a GO train from downtown Toronto and be in downtown Kitchener in an hour and a half, all of a sudden people who might only look for jobs downtown have options, and companies have options to move elsewhere as well if the connectivity improves.
Just in the last year, I think, there's been an airline that started running flights a few times a day anyway from Toronto to KW. Is that working?
I have no idea, but I wouldn't consider that to be a mobility solution that works
for vast numbers of people,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
No, good point, good point. All right, I want to pick up on something that you said a number of moments ago, which was the pressure of Torontonians moving into Hamilton, the pressure that is having and displacing some people. And I want to know what the sort of, you know, what does that look like on the ground in Hamilton?
So, you know, there's a long history of this that's been documented about gentrification taking place and how people get displaced. And oftentimes it's very subtly where landlords will be, you know, non-responsive to repair complaints, those kinds of things. And so people just get fed up and move, right? But there's an incentive in the system built in for people to move because rent controls only exist for the same tenant. So basically, you know, if you live in the same unit, your rent is rent controlled as long as you live there. But as soon as that person leaves that unit, then it's jack it up, right, as whatever the market will bear. So there's a built-in incentive for the landlord to get people to leave. And what's happened, and I actually was quite surprised by this, but in thinking about it, it makes a certain amount of sense. Some of the larger buildings in the North End in Hamilton on John Street and so forth, big landlords have actually come to people and said, we'll give you $2,000 and your last month's rent to move within 60 days. And, you know, to a low-income person, and, you know, let's remind ourselves that the market actually provides most of the affordable housing in Canadian cities. So to a low-income person, that actually might sound like a lot of money and like, oh, wow, this is a great bonanza. But the problem is they might not be aware of the fact that there aren't other places for them to live at the same price that they were paying.
And the landlord can make all that back in a matter
And the
of months.
landlord will make that back. I actually think it's driven by near zero interest rates because what happens is the landlord comes in, they renovate the building, they can rent at a much higher rate, and then they get the building assessed at a higher fair value, and then they take the equity back out, and they get all their money back really quickly, actually.
Interesting.
So it's that kind of dynamic is new in a zero interest rate environment.
Brian, let me ask you about how much affordable housing is affected in the Greater Golden Horseshoe because of the Greenbelt. What's your view on that?
I think in terms of sheltered accommodation, social housing, I don't think the effect is particularly strong. I think these are, particularly in cities like Kitchener-Waterloo, but many other mid-sized cities in the Greater Golden Horseshoe, there's actually a lot of space within the city, existing city, to expand. There's a lot of, for example, surface parking lots that are not being used for anything other than parking cars. And so there's a lot of space within the existing municipalities to continue to grow.
We hear this all the time from developers, though, Jim, which is that we want access to the Greenbelt. First of all, I mean, who wouldn't want to live in the Greenbelt? It's gorgeous.
Sure.
But that's not what it's for. How much of an issue do you think housing supply is because you can't build in the Greenbelt?
It's definitely having an impact, right? So, you know, a place like Burlington is a good example where as soon as the land supply ran out on the periphery in the Greenbelt, at the edge of the Greenbelt, that's when developers started to get serious about the in the city sites. And so the difficulty is that developers, they love developing in Greenbelt because that's what they're built to do, right? They can, it's very easy, the approvals are easy, there's not complications like neighboring buildings and potential, environmental assessment stuff and all the, just a number of complications from doing infill sites, but it's not until the land supply actually runs out that they'll start to do those infill sites and start to get the kind of density which allows for us to scale and then potentially build in affordability. And that you had a Burlington Mayor's program,
Absolutely.
and that's one of the real tensions there.
That's a huge issue, absolutely, for Burlington right now. But is there, we've heard great debates between environmentalists and developers about whether or not there's an adequate supply of land right now to build affordable housing on, absent the Greenbelt. Is there?
I think there is. I think we have to be a bit more creative in terms of what we do with that land. So again, in a place like Uptown Waterloo, and downtown Kitchener, there are acres of surface parking lots, a lot of which are municipally owned. So then the question is, what do you do with that land? Do you sell it to a developer for the highest bidder to build what is most profitable? Or do you take some of that land and say, we're actually going to use that to work with not-for-profits, to work with community groups, to build affordable housing, to build non-market housing that addresses some of those acute needs that I talked about at the outset of homelessness, of sheltered accommodation. Because even though most of our affordable housing comes from the market alone isn't going to solve those issues. We need other players that are involved in non-profit forms of housing.
Well, go ahead, yeah.
Well, I'm just going to, we're running short on time,
Sure.
and I want to get some of the ideas out that we have heard from candidates on the hustings right now and just get your guys' views on these. For example, Ed Holder is a former member of Parliament. He's now running for mayor of London, and he has proposed using closed schools or brownfield areas to build affordable housing. What do you think of that idea?
Absolutely. I think any public land that's available should be used for affordable housing. And I think that, to Brian's point just made a moment ago, it's not, the municipality shouldn't think of itself as a transactional kind of player in all of this, right? We've got a piece of land, we want to sell it, we want to make a profit off it. They should actually say, what are our bigger goals? If one of our goals is build affordable housing, then use our land in ways that are actually going to do that. So maybe it's lease the land instead of to a not-for-profit provider so that they can actually meet our goals, as opposed to selling, which means you no longer control the asset.
Right, but do you run afoul of taxpayers who will then criticize you for not getting every cent out of the land that you possibly could have, even though you may be pursuing a different social development goal?
I mean, it's a political choice. And there are other costs that come when you have to put people up in motels, for example, or pay landlords market rent to house people that you have an obligation to house. So there's all sorts of trade-offs, but I think that's more of a really a political question.
The current the current mayor of Hamilton, Fred Eisenberger, who is running for re-election. I'd like, Jim, I'd like to get your understanding of what these are. He wants laneway homes, pocket homes, and expanding accessory housing suites in residential areas. What does all that mean?
Well, on the one hand, you've got a particular property, it's got a laneway, and maybe there's a garage back there, but there could be a small suite on top of that garage, right? Currently, the zoning doesn't permit that kind of thing, so that increases supply in a very gentle sort of way, right? Without actually being really intrusive. Secondary suites are things that are difficult to license and also sometimes not permitted under existing zoning. So again, that people have excess space. There was a report done in the GTA that showed there's 2 million empty bedrooms in the GTA. And that's a big part of what's driving up housing costs, is that you've got lots of people who are quote unquote overhoused, right? And it's their choice. They own the house, they've got 4 bedrooms. Well, what if they could actually affordably and with relatively little red tape actually develop some of their space into a secondary suite? Then that becomes a rental suite that increases the supply without adding a lot of burden in terms of the infrastructure and so forth, and also accessible.
I've got to imagine that a lot of empty nesters out there who've, kids have moved out, they moved on, and yet there's 1, 2, 3 empty bedrooms in the house. How do you affect what he just suggested?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's part of a solution, but it's still investing in properties that are making those properties worth more, right? If you can charge $1,000 a month to rent out your basement, your house is literally and figuratively worth more money. And I think we have to look at solutions that go outside of the market. So working with not-for-profit developers, community organizations, many of whom are chomping at the bit to build more housing to house those in greatest need, co-op housing, various forms of tenure, shared ownership. These sorts of things, I think, also need to be part of the more transformative solutions, rather than just sort of tinkering at the edges of allowing someone to turn their garage into a
And that's to scale things, right? So yeah, none of these things, there's no silver bullet in any of this, right? So, but that actually helps with scale, what you're describing, Brian, because, like a place like Hamilton, they said, we actually are going to develop a unit within the planning department. When a not-for-profit provider comes and they have a development, we're going to have a specialized unit that's going to handle their application. And that's actually to be able to make it easier for those places. So this lots of municipalities can do, right? So those organizations then can build affordable housing because that's a broader municipal goal. So think about ways that we can actually achieve our goals with the policy levers that municipalities have, and that's one of them.
Mentioned that the mayoral candidates from Cambridge were here the other night. Since that's your neck of the woods, let me ask you about Catherine McGarry's idea. She's running for mayor there. She wants to look at co-housing and secondary suites. What's co-housing? Who knows?
Do you know?
I'm not entirely familiar with the...
I'm familiar with the concept. So co-housing is an idea where it's usually a condominium kind of title, where so each person has their own unit, but there's lots of shared spaces as well. So there might be a shared kitchen, there'd be a shared living space, and so forth. And so it actually is a way of encouraging people to cooperate more and care for each other and provide informal care and those sorts of things. And there is a lot of, again, there's no silver bullets, any of this, and that's not to everybody's taste.
Now, is that illegal right now?
It's very difficult to zone and under current zoning. So, there's some efforts to do this around seniors housing because essentially, mutual informal care and those sorts of things. So that's one of the things. It's not a bad idea. Again, the more that we can provide options for people, I think the better it is. And the more that we can kind of open up channels for not-for-profit or even for-profit developers to do these innovative things that are going to give more options to people, the better it is.
Okay, in our last couple of minutes here, let's just consider what happens. Go ahead, Brian first. What happens if we don't do a lot of the ideas that have been put on the table here tonight? Where are we 5, 10 years down the road if the status quo persists?
Well, we're continuing to see society, our cities becoming more unequal, and we will continue to see that happening. And in a region like Waterloo, where we have this new light rail line, which is reordering the geography of the region, we will see that increasingly along that line, you need to have quite a lot of money to be able to afford to live, either to rent or to buy. So it's sort of this paradox of quality of life improvements, that the quality of life improvement that we've all paid for is really accessible to those who have the means to live along its route. Without any interventions, without any regulations, I think that's the direction we're heading. It won't happen overnight, but you're certainly seeing most of what gets built now is at the higher end of particularly the condo market.
Jim?
Well, I mean, one of the fundamental principles of urban geography, and we share the same discipline, Brian and I, is that low-income people live where the least expensive and least desirable housing is, wherever that may be. And if we don't actually address maintaining affordable units in all parts of the city, then people are going to get shunted to different places, right? We've seen it in Toronto already, right? A place like Cabbagetown wasn't all that desirable at one time. Now it is incredibly desirable, and there are very few low-income people who live there. And now the low-income places are the towers in the kind of second ring of the city. And it's difficult for a lot of reasons because it's very inaccessible to people to get to the inner city, to get to job opportunities and so forth. It's also very difficult to deliver services to people. So in a place like Hamilton, right now the lower city is becoming more and more desirable. It's squeezing people. And so where's the equivalent place that's going to occur in Hamilton? It's going to be all the towers along Mohawk Road and Upper James. And so we're going to see a reordering of the geography, to use Brian's language, that is going to be ultimately to the disadvantage of those low-income people. So we really need to think about scaling the number of units that we can deliver in affordable housing, but also thinking about making sure that we have them located in places where people can live their lives successfully.
You want the last word?
Well, I should just point out there's nothing inevitable about this. These are political choices that are made, policy decisions that are made. So if we continue along a path that we're continuing, which is a fairly non-interventionalist approach to particularly affordable housing, that's the scenario that could happen. But we have all sorts of different tools and a wealth of ideas within our communities of how to avoid those kind of scenarios from happening.
Good. Gents, thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you.
Brian Doucette from the University of Waterloo, Jim Dunn from McMaster University. Good to have both of you here on TVO tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.